Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. Really excited to go over the results today. My name is Allyson Cornett, and I serve as the Director of Research here at Carla Strategies. And I'm joined today by Carla Fletcher, Principal Research Associate and the lead of the Student Financial Wellness Survey. So in case you are not familiar with us, Carla Strategies is a nonprofit research and technical assistance firm with more than 40 years of experience supporting education and workforce systems. Since 2018, we have surveyed over 9 million students across the country, and our work really combines quantitative and qualitative research to help institutions and partners use data to inform strategy, program design, and policy, particularly around student success, financial wellness, and basic needs. And we are all here today to dive into our flagship survey, the Student Financial Wellness Survey, or SFWS. It's a self-reported online survey of postsecondary students. It captures the financial well-being, basic needs security, mental health, and related indicators of student success. We see institutions use SFWS results for a range of purposes, including fundraising, program development, assessment of ongoing and new initiatives, and also building a culture of care for their students. Each year, we produce an aggregate SFWS report and infographic that summarizes national trends. These resources are always publicly available through our research hub, and I'm going to pause here for 20 or so seconds to let folks scan the QR codes that lead you straight to the report and infographic. And again, we'll be sending around a copy of the slide deck as well. You can also get these resources from trellisstrategies.org/insights/research-hub. All right, we can go to the next slide, Carla. Thank you. Okay, before we get into the findings, I just want to share some of our survey metrics. So these findings reflect responses from nearly 66,000 undergraduate students across 153 institutions, including 104 two-year colleges and 49 four-year universities. The total survey population included more than 845,000 students, with response rates around 8% and completion rates above 80%. The median time to complete the survey was 14 minutes, and all these metrics kind of suggest strong engagement with the survey content, which we love to see. All the data we're talking about today reflects fall 2025 undergraduate students at these institutions. Although we do survey graduate students, today we're just covering our undergraduate results. So we'll start by covering our findings related to basic needs security, focusing on food insecurity, housing insecurity, homelessness, and mental health. These issues remain widespread and deeply connected to students' ability to stay enrolled, focus academically, and maintain their overall well-being. We know that more than 2 in 5 students at the time of the survey were experiencing food insecurity, a state characterized by inadequate access to desirable food. 22% of respondents reported low food security, and an additional 21% reported very low food security. And importantly, I always like to call this out, these rates were remarkably consistent across both the 2 and 4-year institutions, really just reinforcing that food insecurity is not an issue that's limited to one sector or the other. And if you've seen any of our other presentations, you'll know that we really like to dive into what the concrete indicators of these dates or characteristics means, as shown on this slide. We saw that 42% of our surveyed students could not afford balanced meals. More than a third reported buying food that did not last and had no money to get more. 34% cut the size of their meals because there wasn't enough money for more food. We also saw 31% ate less than they felt that they should because of a lack of money. And then I think most concerningly here, over 1/4 reported being hungry but not eating because there wasn't enough food. And despite the high levels of food insecurity that we saw on the previous slide, only 19% of students reported visiting a food pantry during the year. Among students at institutions with a food pantry, 40% did not know the resource existed. And to me, this really just highlights gaps not only in access, but also in awareness and outreach. In our next focus area, housing insecurity can include unstable housing arrangements, difficulty paying rent or utilities, or just lacking a safe place to stay. And this all remains a major challenge for today's modern learners. We saw in the survey 35% of students reported housing insecurity through their responses to the scales, and 11% had experienced homelessness. And again, some more indicators here where students reported a range of housing-related challenges. 17% experienced a rent or mortgage increase that was difficult to pay, and others reported not paying their full amount of their utility bills, underpaying their rent or mortgage, moving in with others due to financial problems, and then 5% left their household because they felt unsafe. So when we kind of look at across the spectrum here of food insecurity, housing insecurity, and homelessness, there's a really striking overlap. We saw that 54% of students experienced at least one form of basic needs insecurity. Nearly one quarter, right at 24%, had experienced both food and housing insecurity, and 8% had experienced all three forms. And this all really just lends itself to the idea that these challenges are often compounding rather than occurring in isolation. We also like to highlight student voices to help contextualize the data, and I'm really proud this year to say that we added open-ended response items to the Student Financial Wellness Survey and collected over 45,500 responses from students that we are still sorting through. But in these responses, students described repeated near homelessness, food insecurity, medical issues, and unsustainable debt accumulation, like the student in the top quote, who chose a college 4 hours away from their closest family. They've almost been homeless a few times. They've struggled with food insecurity and medical issues, and then accumulated more debt than they ever imagined. We also see former foster youth in particular report substantially high rates of food insecurity, housing insecurity, and homelessness. And overall, more than 4 in 5 students with foster care experience at least one form of basic needs insecurity, like this student who had nowhere to turn when they aged out of the foster care system, and they dropped out of my first program because they had no support system. We also see mental health challenges widespread among college students. 30% of our students who responded to the survey reported symptoms consistent with major depressive disorder, and 42% reported indicating symptoms of generalized anxiety disorder, which is the most commonly reported mental health challenge in the survey and in broadly. So on the PHQ-2 and the GAD-2 screeners, we see that many students are reporting frequent symptoms. 69% of students felt little interest or pleasure in doing things at least one day in the prior 14 days to taking the survey. And in that same time frame, so that last few weeks, 63% felt down, depressed, or hopeless. And GAD-2, which measures anxiety or the prevalence of generalized anxiety disorder symptoms, we saw that 81% reported difficulty controlling their worry, and 70% felt nervous, anxious, or on edge at least one day in that prior 2 weeks. And really importantly, here at the bottom, I just want to call out that almost 1 in 5, 17%, and 15%, respectively, were experiencing those anxiety symptoms nearly every day in that past 14 days. We also know that loneliness is another critical dimension of student well-being. 57% of our students reported feeling lonely sometimes or always. And while most students at institutions with mental health services knew these services existed, about 1 in 5 did not, as you can see in the chart on the right-hand side of the slide. And this really just suggests that continued need for outreach and also normalization of help-seeking behaviors for these students. And our last slide in this section, some more student voices, where we just wanted to highlight the emotional toll that students are experiencing when balancing academics, work, and personal responsibilities. Feelings of isolation, anxiety, and being stuck were kind of common themes here. And these narratives really highlight to me how mental health challenges intersect with financial stress and academic pressure. And I'm just going to read this last quote on this slide because I think it's really impactful. Um, and this student wrote in to say goodbye to yourself and friends until you graduate and stabilize a job. Feel lonely for the years you're there and convince yourself it's worth it. So at least you don't feel you're going and headed in a downward direction with your life. Settle the anxiety you have when you feel stuck. And that's kind of a nice cap to that section. And next, we're going to take a look at the overall financial security of students in the 2025 Wellness Survey. So as we've seen in the previous slides, students are really struggling to pay and kind of manage their basic needs. This translates into paying for college as well. We know that in addition to financial aid, students must rely on multiple sources to fund their education. In the 2025 SFWS, students use an average of 3 different sources, including current employment, scholarships, grants, loans, personal savings, and contributions from their parents. So students are really piecing together all of these various sources each semester to make their tuition and other related payments. And looking at the data, many of these self-reported sources are as expected, such as the relatively high utilization of grants, scholarships, and student loans. However, at the far right of this chart here, I also want to call out attention to these credit cards, where we see 16% of 2-year students and 13% of 4-year students using credit cards to pay for college expenses. And this is really startling when we start to think about the interest rates on credit cards, kind of compared to more traditional payment sources like student loans. And with that, it is not surprising that in the year 2025, when the survey was conducted, only 4% of respondents were able to self-finance their education using a combination of their current employment and savings. And another student voices slide, which really just highlights what we are consistently hearing from students across the survey. Even when students receive financial aid, the actual cost of attending college often exceeds what that aid is designed to cover. And that gap can be especially pronounced for community college students, like the top quote, who are more likely to be living off campus and paying for housing, transportation, food, and other basic needs out of pocket. Students are also telling us that grants and scholarships help too, as well as Pell Grants, but they're just not enough to fully cover some of those day-to-day expenses. We know that rising costs across the country right now are affecting everything, and not just tuition. We see our school supplies, food, rent, and utilities are all adding up too quickly here. And again, these posts just really helped ground the data in the lived experiences of these students. Financial stress is not some abstract number or reality for these students. It is a constant cumulative stressor, and it's really shaping how difficult it is for these students to stay enrolled and persist, even when they are doing all the right things academically. So even after kind of cobbling together all these sources of funding, we saw that reports of financial fragility were all too common among these respondents, with 71% of students at 4-year schools and 66% of students at 2 years, revealing that they had faced financial challenges while in college. And we know that these financial issues often lead to anxiety, with nearly half of these students, 49 and 48% respectively, reporting that they had difficulty concentrating on their schoolwork due to their financial situation. And this slide highlights once again just how fragile these students' finances are. More than half of undergraduates, 54%, would have trouble coming up with $500 in cash or credit in order to meet an unexpected expense within the next month. And we see that that share is slightly higher among students at two-year institutions. And this is all really just helps explain while emergency aid and short-term support can be really critical to help students stay enrolled. Students also reported running out of money at alarming rates in the 2025 survey. Across the survey, 60%, so 3 in 5, exhausted their available funds at least once since January 1st, 2025, and the time that they took the survey. So that would be October to November of that same year. And we see this at slightly higher rates in the two-year sector, with 26% of two-year students running out of money at least 8 or more times in the year, compared to 17% of students at the four-year sector. And then this quote, which is my last slide before I hand it over to Carla, just really reflects how high the stakes feel for many students. It is a battle of survival. With the increased cost of life, a lot of us are struggling with no external support to fall back on. If I had a major emergency, I not only would have to leave school, but I would also lose my job and lose my residence. And with that, I will hand it over to Carla to get started with our consumer debt section.
Great. Thank you so much. So we're going to dive a little deeper into this financial security that Allyson was talking about and looking at various types of consumer debt that students use. Many students turn to sources of credit and are going into debt to deal with their cash flow shortages. Almost a quarter of all students overall indicated that their total debt was unmanageable. There was a slightly higher percentage of people saying this in our two-year sector compared to our four-year sector. But overall, about a quarter of students saying that the debt that they had was very difficult to manage. Students are turning to credit to pay for everyday expenses and basic needs. Of the 54% of students who reported using a credit card in 2025 for anything, 88% had used a credit card to pay for basic necessities such as food, transportation, or housing. Now, that alone is not, maybe would not be concerning necessarily, except that we see that some students are not paying off these bills in a timely way. We do see that most students strongly agree that they always pay their credit card bill on time, but fewer report paying their balance in full each month. So that means many students are paying interest, carrying over those balances month after month. And so if they're using those credit cards to pay for basic necessities, then they're incurring interest and fees on their basic necessities on their credit card. Respondents at two-year institutions were somewhat less likely to say that they pay their bill on time or that they pay off their balance each month compared to respondents at four-year institutions. And here, again, as a student voice, this one's talking about their concerns with debt accumulation. And they say, my husband works, but including our rent, utilities, food, tires for cars, gas, vet bills, etc., he cannot keep up. We have a massive amount of credit card debt now because I've been in school and we're just trying to get by. So you can see there where even, expenses that people have to deal with regularly, like the cars and the utilities and the food, and then the things that they don't have as often, maybe like vet bills, can be problematic for that debt accumulation for these students. Now, buy now, pay later services are becoming an increasingly popular form of credit everywhere. And we can see that in this survey with 28% of students at two-year institutions and 19% of students at four-year institutions indicating that they use this service. We see college students reporting the use of buy now, pay later and riskier auto title loans and payday loans at higher rates than we do with the national average, where you can see nationally, in the 2024 SHED survey, buy now, pay later was used by 15% of U.S. consumers, and payday loans or auto title loans were used by 6%. So now we're going to move into talking about some student personas and how they can impact the time that students have available to focus on their academics. Modern learners can face many barriers to their success, such as work and family responsibilities. Financial stress and reduced time to dedicate to academics can threaten their success. So we're going to start with our looking at students who worked. About 2/3 of respondents in the 2025 Student Financial Wellness Survey reported working for pay while enrolled, with similar rates of student employment across both the 4-year and the 2-year institutions. Among those who said no to this question about working for pay, half reported actively looking for work in the past month. So even among those who said that they weren't working at that moment, said that they were looking for a job. And a quarter of those who said that they worked said they had more than one job. And this was a little bit more common in the 4-year sector than the 2-year sector, but overall about a quarter. And here we see a student voice talking about the importance of work. With college being so expensive and the price to live being so expensive, a lot of college students have to work more than 2 jobs just to scrape by. Now, among those working while enrolled, 66% considered themselves to be students who worked, while about a third thought of themselves as workers who go to school. This does vary by sector. Among our 2-year respondents, nearly half of students with jobs, 45%, considered themselves to be workers who go to school, compared to just under a quarter of 4-year students at 24%. Almost all of those who self-identified as workers who go to school rather than students who worked at least 20 hours per week, with almost 6 in 10 working at least 40 hours per week. And while work can affect class attendance and time allotted for studying, it can also impact other school-related activities, which can impact the way that the student feels like they belong on campus. Over half of students who consider themselves to be workers first reported that their job interferes with their ability to engage in extracurricular activities or social events at their institution. And here we have another student voice that talks directly to that, saying college students who must work full-time have to learn to give up extracurricular activities nearly entirely. There is little room for anything else in life besides work and school, even when going part-time. So recognizing and supporting working students by reducing barriers, increasing flexibility, and expanding access to resources can help ensure that employment does not stand in the way of persistence, learning, and long-term opportunity. And beyond work commitments, many college students have financial and caretaking responsibilities within their families. This is another persona that we see among students. In addition to potentially working, we see students providing support for their family in the form of caregiving or financial support, or both. Research has shown that student parents in particular are highly motivated learners. They want to improve their family's situation and serve as a role model for their children, but these learners face many challenges in their higher education journey, including time poverty, financial insecurity, and a low sense of belonging with their institution. As a result, over half of first-time enrolled students with children stop out at some point, compared to under a third of their non-parenting peers. So compared to those who identified as students first, those who prioritized their identity as a worker first were more likely to provide financial support for their family, such as children. We see a very large difference here, 31% compared to 9%. And we also see a large difference in support for spouses, 23% versus 7%. And then also a little bit higher in supporting parents or other family members. Now, students who identified as workers first were more likely to say that it is important that they support their family financially while enrolled in college, with 61% of workers going to school saying this compared to 37% of students who worked. Now, beyond the work commitments, many college students have financial and caretaking responsibilities within their families. 17% of undergraduate respondents were caregivers or legal guardians to children or other dependents. This, again, is more common among our 2-year students, where 25% reported being either a parent or a caregiver for another dependent, compared to 8% among our 4-year students. Now, caregivers face increased pressures on their time and finances. And one student described the situation like this: being a 33-year-old who works a full-time job and has 3 kids is extremely hard. I honestly need to work overtime to cover the bills. Overall, 51% of 2-year students and 34% of 4-year students indicated that it was important for them to support their family financially while they're in college. And childcare is essential for student parents. It allows them adequate time to devote to learning, work, and other responsibilities. One student parent emphasized, "It's very hard to continue studying while taking care of a child, especially under 3 years old, who is not at school. If there is an on-campus daycare available from 6 months old with students discount, the opportunity for parents to study and work dramatically increases. So they're really pointing out how important childcare can be to allow parents to take care of their other responsibilities as well. So not surprisingly, losing childcare would be disruptive for many student parents. When faced with the hypothetical loss of childcare, 38% of surveyed student parents said they would have less time to focus on their academics, 30% said they would have to drop classes or take fewer classes, and 29% said that they would be likely to get worse grades. A quarter said that they would be less likely to enroll in future semesters. These self-reported predictions speak to the role of childcare access in student parents' persistence. We added a question in the 2025 survey asking about relationship status, which allows us, among other things, to better identify single parenting students. More than a quarter of parenting students reported being single in our survey. These students were more likely to be financially insecure, with 82% experiencing basic needs insecurity, 81% saying they would have trouble getting $500 in case of an emergency, and 70% reporting receiving public assistance during 2025. Many parenting students, especially those who are single mothers, often experience significant barriers to degree completion, which is amplified by a lack of institutional support and engagement. Previous research shows that only 8% of single mother students left college with an associate or bachelor's degree within 6 years of enrollment, compared to nearly half of college women who are not mothers. Overall, in our survey, 12% of undergraduate respondents reported working and being a parent or a caregiver. And in our two-year sector, it was 18% who were both working and a parent or a caregiver. Now, working and providing care for dependents can create significant time barriers that can impede students' academic progress. We explore this in our survey using a series of questions about missing classes. But first, I want to very quickly talk about transportation, because this is another critical component of student success, and it feeds directly into our academic disruptions that we're about to get into. In order to fully participate in classes and on-campus instruction, students need a means to reliably get to and from campus on a day-to-day basis. Students may also need access to childcare centers, to their work, to other places that they need to go, and that can complicate their ability to commute to campus quickly. In fall of 2025, 59% of students who commuted to campus said that they usually use their own personal vehicle. And while most students considered their vehicle to be reliable, 23% said that their car was either only somewhat reliable or not at all reliable, showcasing the extent to which even students with their own cars struggled with reliable transportation. And so here we're getting to the series of questions focusing on academic disruptions. For busy students, missing classes in order to care for dependents or put food on the table is often done out of strict necessity, but this behavior can present significant academic challenges to these working and parenting students. In the survey, 20% of respondents who had children reported missing at least one day of class in the prior semester due to a lack of childcare. And 21% of working students reported missing at least one day of class due to scheduling conflicts with their job. And then for everyone, regardless of how they commuted to campus, 1 in 5 respondents reported missing at least one day of classes due to a lack of reliable transportation in the prior term. And you can see that these rates are very similar between the sectors. One respondent reflected on the challenge of finding time for college. They said, "It's very hard. As a parent working and going to school, there are many days that you wake up and feel like you should just drop all your classes and work 2 full-time jobs so that you can provide for your kids." Another, talking specifically about transportation, said, "My biggest problem is transportation. I live far away from college and have no car to get to college. I'm struggling a lot, but I still want to study." And that highlights just how important transportation is to so many students and the extent to which unreliable transportation can impact academic progress. But we still find that most students feel that it's worth it. 72% of respondents attending 4-year universities and 78% of those attending 2-year colleges, or 75% overall, agreed or strongly agreed that the cost of college is a good investment for their financial future. Most undergraduate respondents, 84%, believe a college degree will provide them with a higher quality of life. And we know that extensive data back up this belief, demonstrating the financial and non-financial benefits gained by those who earn a higher education credential compared to those who do not. And this student voice echoes that, saying, "It's hard, but worth it. Everything you do during your college career has lasting impacts on your future, and it's a path to a better life, not just for you, but everyone around you." Much of the conversation around post-secondary education debt continues to center on student loans. And while this is an important focus, the findings from the 2025 Student Financial Wellness Survey show that students are increasingly relying on a wider range of consumer credit, including credit cards, payday loans, auto title loans, and buy now, pay later services. These options are typically high cost and offer only temporary relief from financial strain. Although consumer credit can serve as a financial tool in some circumstances, many students in our sample reported using it to meet basic needs and carrying credit card balances over time. And nearly 1 in 4 students indicated that their overall debt was unmanageable, underscoring the significant financial stress that can undermine student well-being and persistence. So to help address these challenges, we encourage campuses to explore a few things here. Non-tuition supports. Basic needs and security is a key driver of consumer credit use among students. 88% of those who had used a credit card in 2025 reported using it to cover basic needs. And 94% of credit card users who had experienced basic needs and security reported using a credit card to cover basic needs. This high level of reliance suggests that expanding public benefit screening and application support, including access to SNAP, housing assistance, and childcare subsidies, could meaningfully reduce students' dependence on high interest debt to meet their basic needs. Data utilization. Institutions can use existing data to more effectively identify students facing financial risk. Indicators such as unmet financial need can reveal gaps that students are often forced to cover through work or credit. Institutions should also pay close attention to students enrolled in payment plans, as many students on those plans rely on credit cards to make those payments. Proactive use of these data can support more targeted outreach and stronger connections to resources. Mental health integration. Financial stress and mental health challenges are closely linked. We've seen this in analysis that we've done on our Student Financial Wellness Survey data. Integrating financial wellness into mental health support can enable more holistic interventions. This could look like including brief financial stress screening questions in counseling or in student services intake. Addressing financial concerns alongside mental health needs may help reduce overall stress and support students' academic persistence. And then financial education. These initiatives can help students better understand the obligations associated with using consumer credit. Although we know that students often make the best decisions that they can with their limited resources, our data show that many may be relying on higher interest products, even when lower cost options might be available. So strengthening campus-based education around credit, interest rates, and alternatives can empower students to make more informed financial choices. The findings from this year's survey illustrate that students' financial lives are multifaceted and deeply interconnected with their academic experiences, basic needs, and mental health. When campuses address these needs holistically, they can lessen students' reliance on high-interest credit and help create the conditions necessary for stability, persistence, and success. And for the last slide here, I just wanted to provide a little more information about the upcoming Student Financial Wellness Survey. We implement the survey every fall, and we invite all interested institutions to participate. Participation is free, and each institution receives a few deliverables. One is a summary report with their student survey responses alongside a comparison group of schools in their same sector. They also receive an infographic that highlights key findings from the survey in a nice brief format that's easy to share and quick to read. And they also get a de-identified data file of survey responses. You can find more information on our website. It's at the top there, trellisstrategies.org/SFWS. The deadline to complete the steps is still a ways out, so plenty of time. And you can reach out to us via the contact form on the website or at the email address that's at the bottom of the page, surveys@trellisstrategies.org. If you have questions, if you want to set up some time to talk, or if you just want to let us know that you're in for the fall, we would love to hear from you. And then lastly, this really is the last slide. If you want to get ahead of events like this today and keep up with our content, you can check out the events page on our website. And with that, we can take a look at any questions or comments that may have come in.
Great, thanks, Carla. Looks like a few questions have come in. Really encourage if anyone has questions for us about the 2025 findings. We've been doing this also since 2018. So we're really, starting to look at this as a longitudinal data set. Or any questions about how to participate in the upcoming 2026 survey, go ahead and get those in. But to begin with, we can kind of get started with the questions that have come in. The first question: with results from 2025, have you noticed trends or a story around COVID into post-COVID? Any mental health issues reported less or less severe? Any other things you are seeing in trends? It's a really great question. So I think in short, we have not seen any of the wellness data from the pandemic to now show mental health concerns becoming less common or less severe or vice versa. We kind of see large shares of students continue to report those symptoms consistent with anxiety, depression, loneliness, and difficulty concentrating. Often those are connected, right, with those indicators of financial stress and basic needs insecurity. We also see there's kind of been a shift from kind of those acute pandemic disruptions to more sustained structural stress with financial insecurity, time, poverty, and basic needs challenges kind of continuing to drive that mental and emotional strain. But I also want to see if Carla has any trends, even not related to mental health, that you might want to mention here, Carla.
I think, not related to mental health, but I think the thing that I always is my go-to when talking about COVID is that we saw and still see very consistent levels of food insecurity, which I just have always found interesting, which I think points to the much higher levels of support that people were getting during the pandemic through just her funding or community food pantry resources or, various things that kind of popped up during that time to really provide support that looks like it sort of maintained levels. And now out of the pandemic, we still continue to see the levels that we did before and during. So I think that's just an interesting thing that seems to have happened. But we are, like Allyson said, starting to do a little bit more longitudinal work with this data set. So that's, we'll be looking at these and other issues.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, more questions coming in. All right, someone asks, do you think that respondents are more or less likely to experience basic needs than their non-responding peers?
I don't know. It's I think one of those unknown questions, but I think the only thing that we can do is kind of compare our results to some other similar surveys. And we do see very similar results on a lot of the key issues. So, is it possible that bias is impacting all of them? Perhaps, but I think this is, the best that we can go with is having multiple surveys showing the same levels of these key indicators.
We also, in the report, if you open the link on page 25, we compare the survey characteristics from the population to the responders, and you can see how things vary. We are slightly over older in age. The average age of our sample is 1 year higher than the population. We also see that first-year students are slightly overrepresented. Students enrolled full-time were overrepresented by about 6 percentage points. And then, as with all voluntary surveys, we were overrepresented with female students by a magnitude of 18 percentage points. And then we also look at race and ethnicity as well. And you can see that Hispanic students were underrepresented by about 3 percentage points. And so, whenever we're doing survey research, particularly an online self-reported survey, there are going to be differences between the respondents and the full population. But I'd also like to echo what Carla said and just emphasize that we are seeing very similar results in our survey compared to other self-reported online surveys of college students. But when you're looking, at like NIPSAS 20, the basic needs and securities are lower, and that is a nationally representative survey, whereas Student Financial Wellness Survey is online, self-reported, and not necessarily, not representative for the full country. So just things to keep in mind. Okay. And then someone asks, do the results vary by region of the country? I don't know if we've done regional analysis, but we do when we have a large enough cohort of participating schools. We do, results by state, but I don't think we've done any regional analysis quite yet. Okay, next question. Out of the 65,000 students, how many students responded to the survey? So of those 65,000, I think it's 65,800 students, just about. Those are the students who responded. The full population of the survey was about 845,000. So our response rate was about 8%. So all the slides that we just covered were from those 65,000 students with whatever logic or kind of filtering applied. Okay. And then let's see. Someone said that they noticed we are using the USDA survey instrument for food insecurity. Yes, we use the USDA 6-item food security module. However, the questions were asked for the past 30 days instead of 12 months. Are you able to explain that decision and how your basic needs questions were designed? Yeah, so I can take that question. So there's actually a version of the USDA food security module that uses the 30-day time frame. We like to use that time frame because we are measuring the survey instrument is delivered to students late October to mid-November. And so we really want to kind of gauge their food security, whether they're high, marginal, low, or very low within that last 30 days to give schools concrete results and actionable results, and know that your students who were enrolled in fall 2025, and these are the students who responded to the survey, and be able to just kind of match up that food security within the semester. I also always worry about recall with I always worry about recall when we're asking students to remember something from 12 months ago. So that's why we use the 30-day scale. But it is a validated scale used by other researchers in this space. And then our other basic needs survey questions, we use a housing security and homelessness scale that we have kind of modified and workshopped with the Hope Center. We're using the same housing insecurity and homelessness scales across both instruments, just to make sure that we can compare results and that things are being measured formed kind of uniformly in that space. It's a great question. Okay, another question. What is a recommended way to share these results and with whom? Is there a best practices guide or template for this purpose? I will kick that to Carla.
Sure. So yeah, I wish we had like a template guide available specifically for this, but I think really a great way to share it around is the infographic that schools receive. It's just such a nice, quick way to get those highlights. And sharing it around just even the institution to different areas of the institution is great. We've also had institutions that kind of work together and maybe like a system level to share it with legislatures when they're trying to advocate for resources or taking it out for grants, using that data to share for trying to get some grant monies. So there's a variety of different ways that it can be shared out to help students. We don't have a specific template to share, but I think those are some good ways to start with it.
Yeah, absolutely. We can also meet with you one-on-one to kind of go over custom next steps or action items that are specific to your institution's results. So every participating institution gets their own results benchmarked across others in their sector. So if you were a two-year college, your results would be benchmarked to other two-year colleges participating in the same year of the survey. We also provide a de-identified data file, a little bit of a mouthful, for you to do your own analysis with, and then we can do an infographic. So this leads in really nicely into our next question that asks, would it be possible to receive our response data with institution-specific data like campus, residency, et cetera, that will help determine if there are specific populations where more support is needed? So yes, we are happy to put that flag into your data for you. And something that we can do is once you get your main results back, if you want to take a look and see what other kind of data flags or variables you might like to put into the survey results, we can append those on for you and then run analyses at your request. And that is also something that we do free for participating schools. Everything that we're talking through today is offered at no charge. So just, yes, if you are interested in looking at anything specifically, as long as it isn't going to identify a specific student, we are happy to add that data onto your data request for you. Okay, next question. Thank you guys so much for all the questions. I love to see them coming in. Next question, if you would have a university address one thing to support student financial wellness, what would it be? And I'll toss it to Carla first so I can think of something to answer while she she goes ahead.
Yeah, that is a tough one. I guess there's so many different things and it depends on the institution, but I think trying to connect students with available supports, like public assistance or community resources, which I feel like my answer is a little bit of a cop-out because it's huge as an answer, but these resources exist and are available. They might be unaware of them. They might be intimidated about asking for help or going through the application process. So there might be reasons why they aren't reaching out to them, but I think having these resources available, you're not having to find money as an institution. So that's probably my answer.
That's a good one. I think it's hard because it is such a broad question, but I always go back to parenting students. I'm the daughter of a first generation parenting student. And I think when we support parenting students, that's how we really can enact multi-generational, long lasting change. And I would say that if we could help student parents, one, understand the programs and funding that's available to them, that would be great. But also just making sure that they feel seen and understood on campus, and just making sure, there's, especially here in Texas, there's a lot of programming and kind of like legislative activity around specifically supporting parenting students. And I think a lot of caregiving and parenting students don't know about those available resources to them, right? Like that many institutions, you can request additional financial aid to help you find campus housing or off-campus housing that works for you and your family. Right. So just thinking through like how we can kind of tweak financial wellness programming to help student parents make those ends meet, I think would be my answer. Okay, maybe I have time for one or two more questions. And I think maybe we group these last two questions. What trends have you observed related to the financial knowledge questions, and what implications for practice would you offer regarding financial education beyond understanding credit products, and what are effective financial education resources? And then a follow-up question, how can students be engaged in financial education when it is not required?
Yeah, that last question is tough. Getting students to come in for these presentations is really difficult. Providing food only goes so far, probably. But so, this is going to be, I think, a really tough thing for a lot of institutions. But incorporating it into the classroom in some way is obviously a way to get it to more students without them having to sign up for something. So whether that be financial aid advisors coming into the classrooms to talk about certain things, or having it be part of the curriculum in like a first year experience class, or I think there's a number of different ways that institutions are trying to incorporate some financial education into every student's experience. And then, the financial education beyond understanding credit products, I think that's a big one that we identified for this year just as one of our themes. But I think there's a lot that can be done with financial education. And there's, curriculum out there that exists even in the high school. A lot of states are requiring it at the high school level now. And so just basic understanding of how interest works, and going all the way up until the different credit products that we talk about in the survey, understanding how those can impact their finances. I don't have a great answer on that one. I would have to really dive into financial education curriculum, but I think there are opportunities. I know that there are some barriers to adding more to curriculum, that's a real tough thing because everybody wants something added into the curriculum. So that's a hard one to make happen sometimes, but I think that's the best way to try to get students the information without them having to sign up for something on campus.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, what I would want to see added in financial education, I don't know about y'all, but every time I'm watching sports, I'm just being inundated with sports betting commercials. And I think that I know that is really prevalent on college campuses as well. And so really trying to educate students about how to be smart with those types of decisions. And when you're kind of playing with those types of products, I think is really important, especially as it is becoming more and more common. It's kind of hard to get away from. And I think, looking at how students can be engaged in financial education when it's not required, when from our research into this, anything that can be gamified is going to work a lot better, especially with college students, especially with traditional age, maybe like FDIC students. But making things gamified and then making sure that that financial education is kind of being offered just in time when students can use that information to make decisions, kind of helps cement whatever is being taught. So that would be kind of my answer to that question. Okay, and then one last question here. I missed it because it came into the chat. Most community college systems have only a fraction of schools participating. There are a few community college and technical college systems that require all schools to participate. Do we have any observations on those systems that require participation by all institutions? So we do have a few systems that participate in a big block. And I think, on the back end, when that system or association participates as one unit, that really helps them advocate at a system or a state level. For instance, if you have, all the community colleges in one state participate, you can go to funders, you can go to your legislators, in other kind of organizations and complete your advocacy, knowing that you have the results for that whole system or association. But I'm not sure if we have any other observations. No, Carla's shaking her head, but I think that is really where we see that kind of that be a plus. It's for advocacy efforts.
Yeah, I think so. We haven't seen any particular differences otherwise in the data, but that advocacy work, I think, is really important, having that block.
Okay, perfect. I'm so sorry to those that we didn't get to your questions. We did our best. There are a lot of questions. Really love to see everyone's engagement. Again, just want to thank you guys and everyone so much for joining us today. We will be sending out the recording of the webinar, the slide deck, And that will be coming to all registrants. You can also share that with your networks as well. And I hope everyone has a really great rest of your day and a happy Monday. Thank you all so much.